Hello, I hope that this works. I'm sorry this afternoon I was working really hard to get everything to work, and sadly, the I don't know if it was the wrong buttons or what. There were a bunch of drivers that I found out were suddenly out of date, and it was just a big struggle, so we canceled it. There were a couple people that got onto the call, and it was miserable because we couldn't even hear each other. But, A plus for effort. There were a couple things that I wanted to talk about and address, and we will do this again next week a little bit. As we move forward, there are a couple things that are really important. One of them is attendance, and the attendance is you can either attend by being a part of this conversation live, or you can attend by watching the recording of this after it's been posted onto our class YouTube channel. And every week I will give you the link to that. I am trying, this is supposed to be automatically entered in to your calendar every week as a student, but it looks like that is not the case. So I'm going to have to, until we get that resolved, I'm going to have to email everybody the link and for people to show up. One thing that I have noticed over the years, even though you do get credit for either attending live or for coming back and watching the recording, is that many people get A's who do not attend the live Teams event, and just watch the recordings. But almost everybody who watches or who attends the Teams meeting live, almost everybody during the course of the term gets an A. And it's not because I'm weighting the grades any differently, but if you're the kind of person that makes the necessary changes to your schedule to attend the Teams meeting live, you are also the type of person who gets an A. And as I said, many people also will get an A who watch the recording. Out of a typical class of 20 students, let's say, there'll be on average about 15 A's and B's, and of those, at least I would say out of the 15 A's and B's, 10 of them are going to be A's. And out of those 10 A's, 2 of them are I'm going to say out of the 10 A's, probably most of them will have at least watched the recordings. But out of the recordings, or out of the Teams meetings every semester, we may have 3 or 4 people that stick with it and watch every single one. They're always going to be the ones among those who are getting A's. So just an interesting observation. Again, it's not necessarily necessary to get an A to be at the Teams meeting live, but it seems that it does correlate to helping get that grade. I am going to be working with IT this week to try to sort out whatever situations are going on with my Teams interface so that you guys do get those meeting notices. And I am also going to be seeing what I can do to work out so that you guys can hear me all the time. It looks like that's taken care of, kind of. But one thing I don't like is that you are also getting a lot of extraneous background sound, which I want to see if we can get that sorted as well. This course, Introduction to Art, we are going to be talking about art from a broad spectrum of humanity and history, going from prehistory to contemporary times and touching on every continent that there's a record that people left behind that includes art. There's a lot of stuff that we're looking at. We're going to be moving fairly quickly through stuff. So this is not designed to be an in-depth look at any movement or period, but it's to give you a broad general understanding and appreciation for art that our ancestors have made, that people make today, but also how kind of things dovetail and fit together. And over time, you can kind of see how different things will relate to each other a little bit, get something of a glimpse of that. There's a couple things that I want to point out that I think are pretty important. One is it is it is not really appropriate to evaluate what somebody has done using only the standards and expectations of your own viewpoint. What I mean by that is I have seen people quickly dismiss what something did a couple thousand years ago because it looked like a scrap of something or it looked unfinished. I've seen people dismiss things done by somebody on another continent because they never had access to a computer, for example. And I think that's really sad because there's an awful lot that we do and see it just as human beings that represent significant investments of time and meaning on the part of the people who make it. And I think as fellow human beings, we kind of owe it to other people. And I think that shows a little bit that we owe it to ourselves, but I think we owe it to other people to respect at least the effort that was made and take a moment at least to try to get a glimpse of the culture of whoever made that thing that we're looking at. Sorry, I'm on a slippery couch and I keep sliding forward, so I keep leaning back like that. It's not intentional. I'm sorry. When we see something done by somebody else that doesn't look like something that we do, we have to be aware that cultures will generally have the same tools that they work with, but they're not the same iteration of the tool. A lot of the times because different cultures will have different resources, different things that are important to them. Different things hold different types of symbols or materials in different levels of esteem. For example, in some European cultures, coinage was made with metal like copper and silver. In some Polynesian cultures, coinage was made with coral. The person using coral wasn't a savage. The person using metal wasn't a savage. It was just that was the material that was important to each other, to the separate cultures at that time. Coral is a hard material that is difficult to work. Metal is a hard material that is difficult to cast. And both of them represent some sort of element of permanency. And that was one of the reasons why, and they're relatively easy to carry in small amounts. And so that's one of the reasons why they were used as coinage. If we go to Sparta of the time of King Lycurgus, he forced people to turn in all their coinage with and have it exchanged for large wheelbarrows full of iron. And the reason he did that was not because one way was better than another, but he did that specifically to get people out of the mode of thinking that money was the way to go. And so he kind of forced Sparta to go back to a culture of trade when he was alive. And after a while, value became associated with much different things than coinage. So it's all perspective, and it all depends on the culture that we're examining, rather than the culture of the observer, whoever that observer is. So please keep that in mind. And there are some tools that I would like you to be aware of that I called the 4 tools of artistic critique. I introduce you to somebody that I'm pretty sure that most of you have not heard of. And I want you to look at them. Don't dismiss them. Think about, okay, we're looking at this within trying to understand the culture that produced whatever it is that we're looking at. But what I want you to do is use these tools to help you to appreciate and understand what it is you're looking at. And these 4 tools are describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate. When we describe something, we're talking about things like the texture, the material, the height, and the width. The things that we can look at and examine that describe how this thing is, how big it is, how it impacts the world, essentially. If we're looking at a painting, we can talk about how wide it is and how tall it is. Maybe we can talk about the colors that are in the painting. We can talk about the materials both of the paint itself and the surface that the paint is put on. These are different things that deal with describing. When we analyze something, we are trying to imagine and kind of extrapolate how the thing was made. If it's a painting, for example, we can analyze how the canvas is stretched or the surface sanded so that the surface is smooth enough to paint on or stable enough to paint on. Maybe rather than a canvas, the surface is plaster, and we can analyze how the plaster was smoothed out or how the plaster was prepared to receive the paint. We can also analyze how the paint was applied. Maybe the painting was done with black and white, and then a thin glaze of color was added on afterwards. Maybe the different areas of the painting were applied with different tools so that it feels different to the eye or looks different. Those are the kinds of things that we can do when we analyze something. When we interpret something, that's when we start using our imagination more to kind of guess maybe what the artist meant or what the artist is trying to communicate. For example, if we go back to the example of the painting, perhaps there are some areas of the painting that have a very specifically different texture or different color use. Maybe a lot of the times we can kind of guess how somebody or kind of guess what somebody wanted to communicate by their color use. Red generally has to do with high energy, things like passion or anger. Green and blue generally have to do with more calming energy. Yellow is bright and attracts your attention. White feels more open. And of course, this is all from a Western perspective because different cultures will have different meanings that are associated with their color. And when we look at something, for example, from a different culture, then we can also, using the tool of interpretation, we can also take into account what different colors, for example, mean within that culture. So it really helps to be aware of the culture. And that gives us more tools to work with to understand maybe what the artist was trying to communicate. And then the fourth tool is evaluation. Is this piece successful? Does it look like the artist gave up halfway through and walked away? If it does look like it's unfinished, do you think the artist left it unfinished on purpose? Or maybe they did finish it, but they meant for that area to look unfinished. You know, all these things we're trying to guess at. Did the artist succeed in whatever it is that the artist was trying to communicate? If there seems to be a message that is clearly portrayed, then yes, that is successful. We can evaluate that it's successful. If there is a use for the object, is there a specific use? And we can see that that is useful for that particular intention, then yes, the object is successful. What if, though, the object is carved out of a potato and it's supposed to be used like a hammer? Well, maybe it could be an excellent carving from a potato, but it's not going to be successful as a hammer. And of course, that's an absurd example, but what we can do is look at things and, like, let's say we found an object that is made out of silver, which is a precious material in most cultures. It's a small object and it looks like it could have been used to hold nibs for a pen. Well, if it's a case that functioned and did that job, then it's successful and we can evaluate that it was successful on that level. If it was an object that was designed to look expensive and to tell your neighbors, to communicate to your neighbors that came over that you have enough income that you can throw a bunch of it away on an expensive pen nib holder, then it's successful for that too. Or maybe it was created specifically by one person to show the esteem that they, or to demonstrate the esteem that they felt for another person. And it's successful on that level too. So there's lots of different ways that we can evaluate something to see if it's successful. On the other hand, maybe this work of art, the person, even though they had access to good tools, just was not interested in finishing it. And they didn't finish it and they walked away because they just lost interest in it. Then maybe it's not as successful. or maybe even though we can tell that in some areas the person demonstrates that they did have a good skill level, a high skill level, and just did a sloppy job, then maybe it's not so, we can evaluate that it's not so successful. So can you see how we can use those kinds of tools to think intentionally and observe intentionally a piece of artwork? And then we can use our precise language to communicate the kinds of things that we see and the kinds of things that we detail as we observe a work of art. Now I say artistic critique. Critique and critical both have really negative connotations, because most of the time when somebody critiques our work or is critical, it is a negative experience. Well, what critical actually means, and what it should still mean, is intentional. We are thinking with purpose. We are observing with purpose. So when we are artistically critiquing something, we're not pointing out flaws. We don't want to do that to anybody. What we are doing is looking specifically at the work. We're engaging ourselves in it, and then we're using our words to speak about whatever the artwork is with intention and on purpose. And that's what critical thinking actually, that's what critical observation and critical thinking means. We are observing and we are thinking on purpose and with intention. So something to think about. It should not be a negative thing. Now the banging and scratching you're hearing in the background is, I have 3 dogs that are trying to help me by entertaining you in the background. Sadly, you can't see them. That does get a little bit annoying, doesn't it? And now one is clawing on my leg because she wants attention. That is so helpful. As we move forward through this term, what we want to do is look at things with intent and be able to speak about them with intent. And that is where the critical thinking comes into. Now, I mentioned something that I would touch on that there's a good chance you never heard of. And that is, there was a gentleman named Sundiata, who was in 14th century Mali. And he has been labeled the greatest world conqueror that nobody ever knows about, because he conquered more lands than Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great did combined. Well, he influenced more lands than either of them did, were able to conquer. And what he did that was really unusual was, when he went into areas to conquer it, he would remove the people that were victimizing the population. He would bring in and support freedom of religion. And he would also teach people how to read and write, so not so much that they could become intellectual or great philosophers, but specifically so that they would have the tools to defend themselves and create contracts and govern themselves, instead of being victims to other warlords and people that label themselves sorcerers or wizard kings. And what he did was create a culture that was unified in intention and able to very clearly express itself with something of a distinct visual vocabulary. And so what we will be doing throughout the term is returning to this every once in a while, using our tools of critical thinking specifically, or artistic critique, specifically to examine evidence of the Mali culture from this time period, so that by the end of the term, we can make something in the styles of the people that lived in that culture 600 years ago, but we'll make something from our contemporary perspective that they didn't know they needed. You know, like maybe we'll create, people have in this class before made stethoscopes that looked like they were made from materials available in the Mali Kingdom. People have made weight benches and models of bicycle, even a water park, not a full-scale thing, but a scale model of a water park out of materials that they felt were appropriate to the Mali Kingdom, and with an aesthetic that looked like it had existed, it would have existed in that time period 600 years ago. So we are going to be learning a little bit about Sundiata, the original Lion King, and looking at the artwork that was prevalent while he was alive, and then using our skills of critical observation and thinking, we will, by the end of the term, 4 months from now, make something that the Mali Kingdom didn't know they needed. And we'll talk about we'll touch on that every couple of weeks. It is a big project, But since we'll be touching on it every couple of weeks, you'll do a little bit at a time, and it will be a lot more doable. So I think next week, I'm going to be releasing the modules a little bit at a time, so that you can see what we're going to be doing now and then a little bit in the future. We're talking about why is art important next week. And then we're also going to be going into later on creativity, the elements and principles of design, and we're going to be talking about the art of prehistory. Those are just some of the things we're going to be addressing in the future. But for this week, I want you to go over the module and spend some good thinking time on what is demonstrated in the video talking about the tools of artistic critique. There's a video where people look at a piece of art and then they apply the tools. So by the end of the video, and I think it's about 5 or 6 minutes, by the end of the video, they have a completely different appreciation for the work of art. Whether or not you use these tools to actually like something that we look at, I don't care. But at the very least, I want you to be able to intentionally observe, speak about it intentionally with precise language, and then gain, by the time that you're done with the process, gain an appreciation for the effort that the artist went through when they made whatever it is that we're looking at. All right? And I think that that's probably the most important thing when we look at art. Those two things I think are the most important thing. One is looking at it, being aware that it comes from a culture or person different than us, and that we look at it with at least an intention to hopefully appreciate the effort that went into making it original. Whether or not you like it personally means a lot less than whether or not you respect the person who made it. So those are the things that I think are the most important. Now, of course, the meeting today is pretty short and nobody showed up because we had technical difficulties and everything like that. I will post a recording of this on our YouTube channel, and you have a link for that. To get credit for attendance every week, either attend the Teams meeting live or watch the recording, and then submit 3 things that you learned from the recording. And they could be 3 things that relate to the class. They could be 3 things that are completely unrelated. Like, for example, after you watch this recording, you could say, that's a very colorful couch next to the professor's shoulder and the fake background that he's using. You could also say, I learned that he has 3 dogs that do not respect the fact that he's trying to teach. And the third thing is, you could say, I've never heard of Sundiata before, and it will be interesting to find out more about him. That's pretty much it. It's basically you're saying those 3 things just to show that you watched the video. All right? If you have any questions as you look forward in the modules or anything like that, please email them to me before our meetings on Tuesday afternoon, and then I can address them for everybody. It's helpful to me to so I can be more precise in the modules themselves, but it's also helpful to everybody else because sometimes you may be the only one brave enough to ask the question that you're asking, but even though everybody else wants to know the same. So think about that as we go forward. I've spoken a little bit quickly. I didn't want to take an awful lot of time because there were some technical issues earlier. But I look forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday. I am also, you were supposed to be getting notices on your team's calendar that we were having a meeting, and I don't know why that's not working. I'm going to be working with technical staff to see if we can get that fixed. In the meantime, I will do my best to send out emails beforehand with the links to the Teams meeting. So I believe we're meeting at 3:30. At 3:30, you can find that link and click on, and that should take you either directly to the Teams meeting or a guest room. If it takes you to the guest room, I'll open it up and put you in. And we're going to be recording each of the Teams meetings so that people can watch them later. All right. Thank you so much for your patience today. It's the first day of our classes. It's the first week of your school experience this year, and I'm disappointed that I was not able to get the technical aspects fixed for us, that we had some issues. So, but thank you very much for your patience, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. All right? Thank you.